Welcome to our live stream. Whether you're catching us live or on a replay, I'm so glad you're here. Today, we have a special guest host. My name is Angie, and I'm the Executive Director at Drug Free Clubs of America. And if you know our program, you know that one of the things we try to do is build ideal moments where parents and teens can have comfortable conversations about drugs and alcohol. The work of the Ohio Opiate Education Alliance is in perfect harmony with this, so it makes sense that we would work together. About once a month, they send us some content that we then send out to the parents of our members, and then a few days later, the Alliance hijacks our live stream, like they are today, to talk about that topic. As our host, they are watching the comments in the feed, so please interact, ask questions, whatever you want to know. Please like and share the video because you never know who you might help. Thanks and enjoy.
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Facebook Live event. I'm Andrea Magana-Lewis with the Opioid Alliance, and today we are going to be discussing an important topic, which is particularly relevant since April is Minority Health Month. And we're going to examine how Black and Brown communities are being impacted by the opioid epidemic. So if you have any questions or comments during today's conversation, feel free to drop them in the chat. With me today is actually my former boss, Miss Lilly Cavanaugh, who is the Executive Director of the Ohio Latino Affairs Commission. And they serve as a liaison between state government and the Latino community in Ohio. Thanks for joining me, Lily.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
So Lily, 30 years ago, when crack cocaine and opioids were devastating urban Black and Brown communities, our country really responded by declaring a war on drugs. You know, as a result, a lot of those people who were living with addictions were criminalized. They were thrown into jail. And now we're fast forwarding to present day. And America's response is finally shifting to a tone that's more compassionate to those living with addiction. I think we're even starting to see that with how the George Floyd cases, being discussed and his opioid addiction. And so it's good that we're shifting to that tone of compassion, but a lot of focus still does remain on the unanticipated victims of the epidemic, and those are the white suburban Americans. Now, we know that we're in the midst of one of the largest drug epidemics in history, and no racial or ethnic group has been spared. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about how Black and Brown communities are being impacted by the opioid epidemic.
Thank you. And I'm so glad we're having an opportunity to cover this topic because it is very relevant. And as you mentioned, not only for the racial justice and injustice issues that we've seen, but also the pandemic has brought to surface many of these very catastrophic issues that we are facing. Ohio has the fourth highest opioid-related overdose death for Hispanics, and is the highest fifth for African Americans. So this is a really, really large number. And it's very important for us to take note of what those numbers are and what it means for our communities. Death rates are involving synthetic opioids like heroin, and those have increased by 617% among the entire Latino US population, and 818% among the Black population. So just to try to grasp our brains around these percentage increases is extremely difficult for us to understand when we're talking about more than 600 and 800. It's something really important because now we're finally able to articulate some of the history and the stories behind what we're hearing from the communities. And something that is really important is that many times these opioids overuse can start in a very innocent way. To give you an example, within the Latino community, many times you find farm workers who cannot have the flexibility of just staying home when they have aches and pains. They must figure out a way of controlling pain in order to continue to work. And they start taking some of these medications, and next thing you know, they are now addicted. We also have a lot of young people and adults, and this applies to the Latino community as well as the African American community and many of the other ethnic communities, where they're just overwhelmed by the responsibilities and they cannot sleep. They have very strong strong issues dealing with feelings and emotions that they are experiencing. And for many of them, this whole situation that is happening across the country and with the pandemic is simply triggering a lot of memories and trauma due to immigration, due to the journey coming to the United States. And something else that is a big trigger is also loneliness and solitude, dealing with that sense of loss for their previous countries when they happen to have migrated to the United States, or trying to fit in where they feel often they're not Latino enough, but they're not American enough. And if we consider our Black and African American communities, there is a huge sense of loss of a community that feels that we don't know if we're moving forward or if we actually are going backwards in time. So all of these things combined really set a baseline for the potential of abuse of medication and opioids.
And can you talk a little bit about how the stigma around mental health and addiction in Black and Brown communities are maybe impacting people's likelihood to even seek treatment in the first place, or have these discussions, candid discussions within their own families?
Yes, and this is something really important. I think that within the Latino and the African American community, we really have a reluctance to recognize this as a need and to be able to seek out the help of a physician or a therapist. We feel that if we have survived so much, we can survive this feeling of sadness or this feeling of anxiety, or we can survive this little bit of extra pain. And if you think of the African American community, and many times you hear, well, our ancestors survived slavery. What can a little bit of anxiety do to me? Or maybe for the Latino community, we don't want to appear weak spiritually or morally. And we also have this sense of fatalism, where we say, well, if it is God's will, then it is going to be what it is. Especially within the Latino community, and this applies to a lot of the other ethnic minorities, is that we are extremely private, but at the same time, we depend a lot on our extended family to be able to cope with difficult problems within the family unit. And the same applies to the African American community. The big difference is that for Latinos, for migrants, for immigrants, we don't have that extended family circle that allows us an opportunity to voice some of the concerns, to try to deal with some of the problems of illness and addiction. And so we just keep it inside. And generally speaking, we have not learned how to speak and recognize addiction or mental illness as an illness. We don't feel bad about talking about diabetes or cancer or high blood pressure, but we will simply not bring it to surface to speak about any issues with addiction or mental illnesses.
So with that said, what are some strategies for addressing addiction and mental health in diverse communities?
Well, I think something that is very important is to begin by acknowledging the adversity that our communities are experiencing. And the fact is that there's a feeling of exclusion from many of the health, from the educational, social, and economic resources. And that's just a reality that we live with in our minority communities. So it's super important to form community partnerships with key leaders and organizations that are trusted by Brown and Black communities. We have to have cultural responsiveness to the impact of treatment and its effectiveness. What may work very well for a white Caucasian may not work as well for an African American, for a Latino, for a Somali, from somebody from Nepal. So we really need to understand what that culture role is. And something that is super important is engaging churches. And we need to engage faith-based organizations, because they're the ones that help us interpret society. And many times you'll find out that we don't understand something, but we go to church, and the pastor or the pastor's wife, they're going to help us understand and dealing with some of these issues. And then we need to also find mentors and people within our own communities that are in recovery, because we are not going to trust what they tell us of somebody else. But when you see someone who looks like me, who speaks like me, who has an accent and a history like me, then I might be more willing to consider some potential help. And again, building that trust and relationships with those that serve in the community, like health workers, ideally more bilingual and culturally qualified people can be out there serving the communities, just so that we are feeling like we can build trust, because really that is the foundation for any work that we want to do in this space.
And the Opioid Alliance is very focused on prevention efforts, particularly with the next generation. And so my question to you is, how can we as parents, teachers, mentors, how can we best support Black and Brown youth when it comes to mental health and drug use prevention?
That is a really important question, and in fact, is a very crucial part of the work that now the Latino Affairs Commission is beginning to work on, and that is providing context and providing language so that these youth is able to express what is going on. Because in our communities, as I mentioned earlier, we don't even have words to articulate what the problem is. And so as parents, as teachers, as mentors, we need to start talking about what the issues are around the opioids crisis, about mental illness, about addiction, so that these youth is able to connect and finally hear in the words of elders and the words of people who are trusted, that language that is actually encapsulating some of the feelings, the emotions, the stress, the fears that they have, but they did not know what they were called, what is the name for it. And I think that those who are especially within the Brown community, Latino, refugee, migrant, immigrant community, experience this quite a bit, where we lack context, we lack the words. So better understanding that problem is really important, because that's going to allow youth and us to build a context and to be able to identify some of the factors that are impacting our youth in our community. And again, asking them, what are the challenges that are affecting you right now? Because those challenges are going to change a lot. The second thing that I really urge parents and teachers and mentors to do is connect with community serving organizations, connect with the Alliance, connect with these experts that have the resources, the technical know-how, and ask for help. And I think that that is something that is very important, because we cannot do it alone. We need support systems. And that is something that, again, going back to that sense of maybe shame or fear or not wanting to expose ourselves, is something that is extremely important. And as always, we say, we got to listen to those we're willing to serve, because what we may think is what they need may not exactly be how they want to receive that support. So building on that context, understanding the problem, providing the words so we can articulate what we're going to do about this, and then asking the right questions of youth and parents and family about what are the specific challenges that you are facing, and of course, connecting to those community solutions that are rooted in the communities, and they're going to be there to support you through the entire process.
And I think you touched on, too, the importance of culturally and linguistically, responsive materials. And I did want to mention that the Opioid Alliance now has a lot of its prevention resources available in Spanish, and that can be found at don'tliveindenial.org. And Lily, I know that OCHLA also has several resources in Spanish that we can link to the chat here after we're done.
Yes, definitely. The Commission has created a website now in collaboration with the Opioid Alliance, where we have materials in English, we have them in Spanish. We are going to continue to build on those resources, and we want you to know that we are here to help you, to support you, to connect you to organizations that can work alongside with you, and most of all, to help our community grow and our youth do well. We have to remember that in 87 out of the 88 counties in Ohio, population growth is due to Latino demographic increase. And so we need to build up this population, because the future of our state is in their well-being. It's very important for us to do this along with our Black and African American communities, who have always been working very closely with us. So this is a great opportunity for us to put words into action, to protect our youth, and to continue to make sure that we support them.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us today too, Lily, for this important discussion. I think we could go on all day because it's such a deep, deep topic with many layers. But for those of you listening, feel free, if you have any questions, comments, to put them in the chat. We'll be sure to follow up with you. Also, if you're not already following the Opioid Alliance, be sure to follow us on Facebook. We have Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest as well. Until then, we look forward to connecting with everyone next month. So have a great day.